The courtroom was silent as Judge Samuel Weston leaned back in his chair, the faintest smirk playing at the corners of his mouth, his eyes fixed on the young woman standing at the defendant's table, a teenager named Lily Collins. Her messy brown curls were tucked behind her ears, and she wore a simple hoodie and jeans, looking out of place among the well-dressed attorneys. Her sneakers squeaked slightly as she shifted uncomfortably on the polished floor, but her gaze never wavered from the judge. "Miss Collins," Judge Weston began, his voice dripping with condescension, "are you aware of where you are? This is a court of law, not some high school debate club." A ripple of laughter swept through the courtroom as the attorneys behind their desks exchanged amused glances. Lily stood alone at the defendant's table, clutching a stack of legal papers that seemed far too heavy for her small frame. Her cheeks flushed, but her eyes remained steady, and her posture firm. "Your Honor," Lily said, her voice calm despite the mockery, "I am here to represent my client, Mr. Ethan Parker, who is accused of embezzling funds from his employer." Judge Weston waved his hand dismissively. "Save it," he interrupted, his tone growing more irritated. "This court does not have time for your childish antics. I don't even know why this nonsense is allowed." Lily's grip tightened around the stack of papers, but she didn't back down. Her chin lifted slightly, her voice growing firm as she spoke. "If you would allow me to speak, Your Honor, you might find it worth your time." The courtroom gasped, the audacity of a teenager speaking so defiantly to a judge catching everyone off guard. Judge Weston's smirk faded, replaced by a deep scowl as he leaned forward. "By all means, Miss Collins," he said mockingly. "Enlighten us all." Lily took a deep breath and adjusted the papers in her hands. Her heart raced, but she steadied herself and began to speak, her voice clear and measured. "I've spent the last year studying law in my spare time. I've reviewed legal texts, case law, and courtroom procedures. I'm not just some inexperienced teenager. I've worked hard to understand the complexities of this case, and I am here to defend Mr. Parker." The courtroom fell silent as she delivered a flawless argument, citing case law and legal precedents with such precision that even the most experienced attorneys in the room were stunned. They had been laughing moments ago, but now they scribbled notes, watching her every word. Judge Weston's eyes narrowed as he listened, his expression shifting from mockery to disbelief. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice now tinged with genuine confusion. "How do you know all this? How can a teenager possibly be so knowledgeable?" Lily met his gaze without flinching. "My name is Lily Collins. I may not have a law degree, but I've studied every aspect of this case. I believe Mr. Parker is innocent, and I am the best person to defend him." The room erupted into chaos. Questions were shouted from all directions. How could a teenager represent someone in court? How was she allowed to speak? Judge Weston slammed his gavel, demanding order. "Order in the court!" he shouted. His voice cracked slightly with the strain. "This is ridiculous. You're not a lawyer. You have no business here." Lily's hands clenched around the papers as she held her ground. "Your Honor, I may not have the formal credentials, but I've done the work. I've reviewed all the evidence, and I've spent countless hours studying. I'm here because Mr. Parker deserves a fair trial, and I'm ready to fight for him." Judge Weston's expression remained skeptical, but something in his eyes shifted. The murmurs in the courtroom had quieted, and he was no longer entirely certain that this would be a straightforward dismissal. "You think you're qualified?" he asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "You can't just walk into this courtroom and pretend to be a lawyer." Lily's voice was steady, unyielding. "I understand the gravity of this situation, Your Honor, and I'm not here to waste anyone's time. I've worked hard to prepare, and I'm here because I believe in Mr. Parker's innocence. There was a pause as Judge Weston seemed to weigh his options. His gaze shifted from Lily to the other attorneys in the room, who were now watching her with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. For the first time, it seemed like they were starting to take her seriously. Finally, Judge Weston let out a long sigh and leaned back in his chair. "Fine," he said reluctantly. "You may continue, but know this. If I find that you are wasting this court's time, I will hold you in contempt. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Lily replied, relief flooding through her. She took a deep breath and turned her attention back to her client, Ethan Parker, who had been watching her with wide eyes. The courtroom fell silent again as Lily began her defense. Her heart was still pounding in her chest, but she had earned her chance. This was her moment. She stood tall, her voice steady and full of confidence as she presented her case. She laid out the evidence, pointing to discrepancies in the company's financial records and explaining why her client could not be the one responsible for the alleged embezzlement. She referenced legal precedents that supported her client's right to a fair investigation and a fair defense. The more she spoke, the more the atmosphere in the room shifted. Even the attorneys who had previously dismissed her began to pay attention, taking her words seriously. The judge, still skeptical, leaned forward, clearly weighing her every word. For a brief moment, Lily felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could do this. Maybe she could defend not only her client, but also prove to everyone, especially herself, that she was capable. 2 weeks earlier, Lily Collins had sat alone in her small bedroom, surrounded by law books and stacks of notes. The books weren't hers. She had borrowed them from her older brother, Jacob, who had been preparing for his bar exam when he suddenly passed away in a car accident. Since then, those books had become her lifeline. Jacob had always been the ambitious one, the one who had dreamed of becoming a lawyer and changing the world. He had always believed in her, too, encouraging her to pursue her own passions, even if she didn't always see the point. "You're going to be an incredible lawyer one day," Jacob had often told her. "You've got the brains, the drive, and the heart. Just don't let anyone tell you otherwise." But now, Jacob was gone, and Lily was left with his dreams and her own desire for justice. Her best friend, Sarah, had tried to talk her out of it. "Lily, you're 16. You can't just become a lawyer overnight. You need years of schooling, certifications. You're not even allowed to practice law unless you've passed the bar exam." Lily had always been the quiet type, content to hang back and watch as life unfolded around her. But after Jacob's death, everything had changed. His wrongful death had become a deep wound she couldn't ignore, one that couldn't be healed without action. "I don't care about the rules," Lily had told Sarah one evening. "I can't just sit by and do nothing while people like him go unchallenged. Someone needs to stand up for the truth." Sarah had just stared at her, disbelief in her eyes. "You're talking about taking on actual cases, Lily, representing clients in court. You can't even drive yet, and you're going to take on lawyers who've been studying law for years." "I don't care," Lily had said quietly, flipping through one of Jacob's law books. "I'm not fragile. I'm smart, and I'm determined to make a difference. Jacob believed I could do it." The determination in Lily's eyes had made Sarah fall silent. She knew that once Lily made up her mind, there was no changing it. So, Sarah simply watched as Lily poured herself into studying, absorbing everything Jacob had once studied. His textbooks became her textbooks. His case summaries became her case summaries. And slowly, despite the doubts, despite the voices telling her it was impossible, she began to learn. She'd spent hours each day reading legal texts, memorizing laws, and reviewing cases. She wrote out her thoughts, cross-referencing everything she learned with real-world court cases. There were moments of frustration, moments when she wanted to throw the books aside and walk away. But she couldn't. Not when her brother's dreams were still alive inside her. The more she read, the more she understood the law. She wasn't just learning legal jargon. She was learning how to fight for those who had no voice, how to stand up against a system that wasn't always fair. A week after Jacob's funeral, Lily found herself sitting in the living room with their parents, watching the news as they reported on a local businessman, Nathan Grant, who had been involved in a scandal. Jacob had been arrested years earlier for a crime he hadn't committed. Lily had always believed in his innocence, and now, with this new case involving Grant, everything started to click. Jacob had been accused of assaulting Grant after a dispute at a local bar. But the evidence against him had been flimsy at best, and the defense was weak. Lily had always believed her brother was innocent, but the trial had been a nightmare, and his conviction had shattered her world. Maybe, if we had someone else, if we had a lawyer who actually cared. Her mother had whispered that night, her voice filled with a mixture of sorrow and frustration. Lily had clenched her fists, determination filling her chest. Someone needs to fight for what's right. Someone needs to challenge the system. And that someone is going to be me. She'd started researching Grant, digging into his financial history, his business practices, and his connections. The more she learned, the more she realized that there was a pattern to the way people like Grant operated. They used their power to manipulate the law, to cover up their wrongdoings. But what troubled Lily most was the thought that her brother, Jacob, might still be imprisoned unjustly because of people like Grant. "I'm going to do this," she whispered to herself, alone in her room that night. "I'm going to make sure this never happens to anyone else." By the time the opportunity to represent Ethan Parker came up, Lily had already absorbed enough information to feel confident. She had studied legal cases, memorized precedents, and learned courtroom procedures, all from the books that Jacob had left behind. And when Ethan was accused of embezzling money, she knew it was her chance to make a difference. Even though everyone around her, including her parents, warned her that it was too dangerous, that she wasn't ready, Lily felt something shift deep within her. She wasn't just representing Ethan Parker. She was representing her brother's memory. She was standing up for the principles Jacob had taught her, for the dreams he had once shared with her. "You don't have to do this," Sarah had said one more time, sitting on Lily's bed the night before the trial. "What if you lose? What if you make a mistake?" Lily had looked her best friend in the eye, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Then I'll learn, but I won't give up. Not after everything I've learned, not after everything Jacob went through." Sarah had simply nodded, understanding that this was no longer a matter of logic. It was a matter of the heart. Lily hadn't known how this battle would end. She didn't know if she would win the case, or if she would even survive the chaos that lay ahead. But she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer that quiet, timid teenager. She was a fighter, and she was ready to stand in the courtroom and make her voice heard. The following day, Lily stood tall at the defendant's table, facing the judge with an unshakable determination in her heart. She could feel the weight of the room on her shoulders, but it didn't break her composure. The courtroom was buzzing with energy, but Lily was focused. This was her moment. Ethan Parker, her client, sat beside her, his anxious eyes fixed on her, and she felt the weight of his future resting in her hands. Judge Samuel Weston, sitting high in his seat with a stern expression, cleared his throat. "Miss Collins," he began, his voice cold and disapproving, "I must remind you once again that you have no formal legal training. Your presence here is a violation of courtroom protocol." Lily stood tall, her voice steady. Your Honor, I understand that this is unconventional, but I am here to defend my client. I have done the research, I've reviewed all the legal documents, and I'm ready to present my case. Judge Weston's lips curled in a sarcastic smile. Ready? You've barely been trained in the law. You're nothing more than a child playing at being a lawyer. This court doesn't have time for games. A wave of discomfort washed over the courtroom, but Lily stood her ground. The murmurs from the attorneys and spectators didn't shake her focus. She had come too far to let this dismissive attitude ruin her chance to defend Ethan. Your Honor, I know this is difficult for you to accept, Lily said, her voice quiet but firm. But the law is about justice, not credentials. I've studied this case thoroughly, and I believe Mr. Parker is innocent. I am not here to waste anyone's time. I am here because he deserves a fair defense. The tension in the room was palpable. The judge, who had been so quick to belittle her, paused, momentarily thrown off by her unwavering confidence. It wasn't something he was used to seeing from someone so young. Fine, Judge Weston finally grumbled. You may continue. But if you waste my time, I'll hold you in contempt. Understand? Lily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. Yes, Your Honor. As she began her opening statement, Lily felt the eyes of the entire courtroom on her. For a brief moment, she wondered if she was in over her head. But then she thought about Jacob, about the dream they had shared. He had believed in her. This was her chance to prove that she was capable, that she could fight for justice. She took a deep breath and began. My client, Mr. Parker, stands accused of embezzling funds from his company, Lily began. The evidence against him is circumstantial at best. We believe that the true culprit remains at large and that Mr. Parker has been wrongly accused. She spoke with authority as she outlined the flaws in the prosecution's case, citing legal precedents that supported her claim. She pointed out the discrepancies in the financial records that were presented as evidence, suggesting that they had been manipulated. As Lily continued, she could feel a shift in the room. Even the seasoned attorneys who had been scoffing earlier were paying closer attention. She was speaking with a level of knowledge and clarity that was surprising to many. She quoted case law like an experienced lawyer, her arguments sharp and well-reasoned. But the battle was far from over. Your Honor, the prosecutor, Catherine Turner, interjected, her voice dripping with skepticism. Miss Collins may have done her homework, but she is still a child with no legal qualifications. Her argument is nothing more than speculation. Lily kept her composure, her jaw clenched in frustration. She could feel the eyes of the courtroom on her, some mocking her, others curious. Catherine Turner's words stung, but they didn't break her. She was used to being underestimated. I'm not speculating, Ms. Turner, Lily replied, her voice unwavering. I am presenting the facts. Mr. Parker has been framed, and I'm here to show that. Judge Weston glanced at the prosecutor, then back at Lily. Your Honor, Lily continued, I have obtained documents that suggest discrepancies in the company's financial records. There is evidence that someone within the company has been funneling funds through secret accounts. Mr. Parker was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. The judge raised an eyebrow. You seem to have done quite a bit of research, Miss Collins, but where is your proof? Where is the concrete evidence? Lily hesitated, but only for a moment. She had anticipated this question. I will be presenting evidence to the court in due time, Your Honor. I have subpoenaed the company's financial records, and I've contacted former employees who are willing to testify that Mr. Parker had no involvement in the embezzlement. The courtroom fell silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone present. Lily knew that the judge had been skeptical, But now he was listening. For the first time, she felt that the tide might be turning in her favor. Judge Weston remained silent for a moment before giving a short nod. "Very well. You may proceed. But know this, Miss Collins. You have a long way to go before convincing this court of Mr. Parker's innocence." Lily nodded, a sense of resolve flooding her. She wasn't backing down. She would prove herself. As the day wore on, Lily presented her case with the same clarity and precision. She brought in witness testimony, called for cross-examination of the company's financial officer, and presented documents that slowly began to unravel the prosecution's claims. Each piece of evidence she presented made it clearer that Ethan Parker wasn't guilty. Throughout it all, she could feel the growing respect from the room. Even Judge Weston, though still skeptical, was beginning to see that Lily wasn't just a teenager playing dress-up. She was a force to be reckoned with. As the day came to an end, Lily felt a wave of exhaustion hit her, but there was also a growing sense of accomplishment. She had done something no one had expected her to do. She had held her own in a courtroom full of seasoned professionals, and she was just getting started. The next morning, as the courtroom reconvened, Lily stood at the defendant's table, ready to continue her defense of Ethan Parker. The pressure was mounting. The courtroom was packed, and the eyes of many, judges, lawyers, and even spectators, were trained on her. She could feel the weight of her client's future in her hands, but she pushed aside the nerves and focused. Judge Weston entered, taking his seat with an air of authority. The murmurs in the courtroom slowly died down as he banged his gavel, signaling the start of the day's proceedings. "Miss Collins," he began, his voice stern as always, "I trust you have more to present today, as you promised." Lily nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I would like to continue with my defense and present the witness statements I've gathered regarding the discrepancies in Mr. Parker's company's financial records." But before she could go further, the courtroom doors opened, and a tall, sharply dressed man walked in. His suit was impeccable, his face serious. The man exuded an aura of power that immediately caught everyone's attention. He was Michael Carter, a representative of the Bar Association, and Lily's heart skipped a beat. She had not expected him to show up today. He strode up the aisle, stopping at the front of the courtroom. His gaze briefly flicked toward Lily, before settling on Judge Weston. "Your Honor," Michael Carter's deep voice echoed across the room, "I must request a brief recess to address a matter of great importance regarding Miss Collins's presence in this courtroom." Lily's stomach dropped. She could already guess what he was going to say. It was the last thing she needed right now. Judge Weston looked at Michael, then back at Lily, his expression unreadable. "What is this about, Mr. Carter?" Judge Weston asked. Michael Carter turned to face the room, his eyes scanning the courtroom before locking with Lily's. "I'm here to inform the court that Miss Collins is not licensed to practice law and has no legal authority to represent a client in this case. We've received an anonymous tip concerning her qualifications, or rather, lack thereof." The courtroom buzzed to life again. The atmosphere shifted. The whispers of doubt began to grow louder, and Lily felt her heart race. This was it, the moment she feared. She had no formal legal qualifications. Everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for, could be taken from her with a single decision. But she couldn't back down now. Judge Weston raised a hand, silencing the crowd. "Mr. Carter, are you suggesting that we remove Miss Collins from the case entirely?" "I am," Michael Carter said, his tone unyielding. "We cannot allow someone without proper credentials to represent a client in a court of law. The law is clear on this matter. If the court allows her to continue, it sets a dangerous precedent." Lily's throat tightened, but she stood her ground, her voice calm and steady. "Your Honor, I understand that this situation is unconventional," she said, addressing both the judge and Michael Carter. "But I have done the work. I've studied the law, researched every detail of Mr. Parker's case, and I am more than qualified to represent him." Judge Weston turned his gaze to Lily. "Miss Collins, while your dedication is admirable, you cannot simply bypass the law because you've read a few books. The legal system is built on years of formal training and experience. Your presence here is a violation of the rules." Lily swallowed hard, but refused to let the weight of his words defeat her. She had to prove that this wasn't just some misplaced ambition. This was about justice. "If I may, Your Honor," she said, stepping forward, "I am here because my client deserves a fair trial, and that is exactly what I intend to give him. I've been relentless in my research and preparation, and I will continue to do so until this case is resolved." Judge Weston's expression softened just a fraction, but his skepticism was still evident. "Very well," he said after a long pause. "I will allow you to continue, for now. But make no mistake, Miss Collins, if I find that you are not presenting credible evidence, or if your lack of qualifications becomes a hindrance to the proceedings, I will take appropriate action." Lily nodded, her chest tightening as she returned to her seat. This was her chance, but the stakes were higher than ever. As the trial continued, Lily pressed forward, presenting witness testimony and additional documents. But with every piece of evidence she introduced, there was always the shadow of doubt. The defense was unconventional, and there were those in the courtroom who were not ready to accept that a teenager could stand in the place of an experienced lawyer. Lily knew that, and she could feel the pressure building as the day dragged on. That evening, as the courtroom emptied, Lily sat with Ethan at the defendant's table, exhausted but determined. Her fingers drummed nervously against the table, her mind racing with the challenges she still had to face. She hadn't expected Michael Carter's intervention. It felt like an obstacle she hadn't been prepared for, and the weight of the law seemed to press against her with every passing hour. But then, as the final pieces of the room cleared, Lily noticed something. A slight movement in the corner of the courtroom. Her eyes flicked to the side, and she froze. There, standing in the shadows near the door, was a figure. It was Michael Carter again, his eyes locked on her. But this time, there was no hint of disdain in his gaze. Instead, there was something else, something deeper, more thoughtful. Lily's heart raced as she stood, crossing the room to approach him. Michael turned to face her as she neared, his expression unreadable. "Miss Collins," he said, his voice low, "I hope you understand that I wasn't here to dismiss you entirely. I'm only doing my job, making sure the law is followed." Lily nodded, her own voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I understand. But you're wrong if you think I'm just some naive teenager. I'm here for a reason. I'm here for justice." Michael's gaze softened, and for a moment there was a flicker of something. Respect, maybe? "You have guts, Miss Collins. I'll give you that." "Thank you," she said, her heart still racing but now with a renewed sense of determination. "But I'm not finished yet." With those words, Lily returned to her seat, her mind already moving ahead. She had won this small victory, but she knew that the battle was far from over. The following day, as the trial continued, Lily felt an unexpected sense of urgency. The case against her client, Ethan Parker, was growing more complex with each passing hour. But amidst all the legal wrangling, something had shifted within her. She wasn't just defending Ethan anymore. She was fighting something bigger. The quiet, yet powerful presence of Victor Grant, The businessman whose shady dealings had haunted her family for years loomed over the entire case. Lily had never truly believed that the events of her brother Jacob's wrongful conviction would be tied to something as insidious as this. She had always known there were whispers of corruption in the system, but seeing Grant in the courtroom, watching him subtly manipulate the proceedings with his glances and quiet exchanges with the prosecution, made her stomach turn. His face was as smug as ever, unaffected by the chaos unfolding around him. It was clear now that there was more to this case than simple embezzlement. Grant's fingerprints were all over it, and Lily was going to find a way to prove it. As the morning session came to a close, Lily stood before Judge Weston, ready to present her next set of witnesses. The prosecutor, Catherine Turner, sat in her seat, her expression tight with frustration. Lily could feel the pressure mounting. She could almost hear the whispers in the room, of disbelief, of doubts about whether a teenager like her could truly stand up to the likes of Grant and Turner. But Lily didn't flinch. She had learned early on that when people doubted you, it was the best time to prove them wrong. "Your Honor," Lily said, her voice steady, "I would like to call my next witness to the stand." The doors to the courtroom creaked open, and a new figure entered. It was a man in his mid-30s, dressed in a suit that was a bit too casual for the occasion. His face was familiar to Lily, though she had never seen him in person before. It was Aaron Greenfield, a former employee of Grant's company. As Aaron made his way to the witness stand, Lily's heart raced. This was it. This man could provide the evidence she needed to expose Grant's involvement in the fraudulent activities. She knew he had been let go after raising concerns about the company's finances, and she had spent days tracking him down, convincing him to testify. It was risky. Grant had far-reaching influence, but Aaron had agreed to speak the truth, and that was all Lily needed. "Mr. Greenfield," Lily began, her voice calm, "I understand you worked for Mr. Victor Grant's company for several years. Is that correct?" "Yes, Miss Collins," Aaron replied, his voice shaking slightly. "I worked there for about 5 years before I was fired." Lily kept her focus on Aaron, knowing that every word he spoke could be pivotal to the case. "What happened after you were fired?" she asked, trying to keep her voice even. "Why did you leave?" Aaron shifted uncomfortably. "I had been noticing some irregularities in the company's financials. There were unauthorized transactions, funds moving between accounts that didn't make sense. I tried to report it to higher-ups, but instead of listening, I was let go." Lily's mind raced. This was the break she needed, the proof that Grant's company had been manipulating financial records to cover up illegal activities. She pressed on. "Did you ever confront Mr. Grant about these irregularities?" she asked. Aaron hesitated before answering. "I did, but he just brushed me off, told me it was nothing to worry about. I was just an accountant. I didn't understand the bigger picture. But I knew something wasn't right. And when I refused to keep quiet, I was dismissed." Lily's voice was steady as she asked, "And what did you discover after your dismissal?" Aaron leaned forward, his voice lowering. "I found out that Grant was involved in a scheme to falsify records for tax evasion. I'm not the only one who knew about it. There were others, but most people were too afraid to speak up. He has a lot of power, and anyone who tries to challenge him gets crushed." Lily's pulse quickened. This was it, the confirmation that Victor Grant's empire of corruption was not only real, but also far-reaching. This could bring everything into the light. But there was still one more question she needed answered. "Did you ever see Mr. Grant involved in these financial manipulations personally?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the rising tide of emotion inside her. Aaron nodded, his face pale. Yes, I did. I witnessed him signing off on transactions that were clearly fraudulent. There's no way he didn't know what was going on. He was the one pulling the strings. Lily turned to the judge, her heart racing with a mix of hope and apprehension. This was the evidence she needed to take Grant down, to prove once and for all that he was the mastermind behind the crimes her brother had been wrongfully accused of. Your Honor, she said, her voice carrying across the courtroom, I move to submit the testimony of Mr. Greenfield as evidence in this case. This testimony proves that Mr. Grant is involved in illegal activities and is responsible for the financial discrepancies at Mr. Parker's company. The courtroom fell silent. Lily could feel the weight of the moment, the tension in the air, as everyone waited for Judge Weston's response. He looked from Lily to Aaron, and back again, his face unreadable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Judge Weston spoke. Mr. Greenfield's testimony will be taken into account, he said, his voice surprisingly neutral. But, Miss Collins, let me remind you that this is not just about Mr. Parker's case. This is about much more than that. If these allegations about Mr. Grant prove true, there will be consequences far beyond this courtroom. Lily nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and fear. She had exposed the truth, but now the fight was only beginning. The case against Victor Grant was not just a legal battle. It was a fight for justice that would stretch far beyond the courtroom. As the session ended, Lily knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of hope. This battle wasn't over yet, but she was ready to face whatever came next. As the days passed, the courtroom tension continued to build. Each session brought new revelations and unexpected twists. But for Lily, the weight of the case grew heavier with every word she spoke, every piece of evidence she presented. She wasn't just defending Ethan Parker anymore. She was uncovering something far more sinister. The more she dug, the more she realized how deep the corruption ran and how dangerous the people behind it could be. Victor Grant had been a looming presence throughout the trial. His polished demeanor, his calm voice, his subtle manipulations, it was all part of his act, a mask he wore to hide the truth. But now, Lily had uncovered the truth. And with that truth came the undeniable realization that Grant wasn't just a businessman. He was the architect of a vast web of corruption that extended beyond his company. This case was no longer just about embezzlement. It was about exposing a network of criminal activity that had been hidden for years. One evening, after a long day in court, Lily sat in her apartment, the quiet of the night providing a strange contrast to the chaos of the past few days. Her eyes were tired from reading case files, financial records, and witness statements, but she couldn't afford to stop. She had to keep going. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Sarah. We need to meet. I've got something that could change everything. Lily's pulse quickened. Sarah had been helping her track down witnesses and gather additional evidence from the outside. If Sarah had something, it was likely crucial. Lily grabbed her coat, heading out the door, her mind racing with possibilities. What could Sarah have found? The two of them met at a small cafe in a quiet corner of the city, away from the prying eyes of the courthouse and the public. Sarah was already there, her face tense with urgency. Lily, you're not going to believe this, Sarah said, sliding a folder across the table to her. I've been digging into the financial records you've been looking at, and I found something alarming. Lily opened the folder, scanning the contents quickly. There were bank statements, payment records, and internal memos, each one more damning than the last. It was clear that Grant wasn't just manipulating the financials of his own company. He had been funneling money through a series of shell companies, accounts that were linked to some of the most powerful figures in the city: politicians, business tycoons, even members of law enforcement. "They've been covering their tracks for years," Lily whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "This isn't just about embezzlement. This is organized crime." Sarah nodded grimly. "And it's all connected to Grant. He's been using his company as a front for money laundering, bribes, even worse. This could bring down entire networks of people if it's exposed." Lily stared at the documents, her mind racing. She had always known something was off about Grant, but this was more than she had ever imagined. She thought back to Jacob, to his wrongful conviction, and the feeling that everything had been rigged against him. This was the same system, the same web of lies that had destroyed her brother's life. And now, Lily had the key to expose it all. "How did you find this?" Lily asked, her voice a little shakier than she'd intended. "I have a contact who works at a financial institution," Sarah explained. "I've been asking around, trying to get any information that might tie Grant to the shady deals we've been uncovering. This is what I got back." Lily looked at the papers again. There was one name that stood out among the rest: a politician named Richard Carlisle, a man with a long career of public service and a spotless reputation. But the payments, large sums of money sent to Carlisle's private accounts, were a direct link to Grant's fraudulent activities. Lily's heart raced. If they could tie Carlisle to Grant's operations, it would be the final piece needed to take Grant down. But it wasn't going to be easy. People like Grant and Carlisle didn't get to the top without having powerful allies and an extensive network of influence. "We need to get this to the right people," Lily said, her voice firm. "We need to show the world what's really been going on." But as she said the words, she knew the danger they were about to walk into. The people behind this network weren't going to let it fall apart without a fight, and they would do anything to protect themselves. Just as she was about to ask Sarah about their next steps, her phone buzzed again. It was a news alert. "Breaking news. Politician Richard Carlisle under investigation for connections to money laundering scheme." Lily's heart skipped a beat. They had done it. The story was out there. But as she looked at Sarah, she realized that this was just the beginning. They had exposed one part of the web, but there was still so much more to uncover. And with the exposure of Carlisle's name, the stakes were higher than ever. "This isn't over," Lily whispered, glancing at the news report again. "They'll come after us. After me." Sarah's expression hardened. "We have to be careful now. But this is what you've been fighting for. We can't back down now." Lily took a deep breath. She had already made it this far, and she wasn't about to stop. The fight for justice wasn't going to be easy. But she wasn't going to let fear stop her now. Not when the truth was finally within reach. The battle for justice was far from over, and the road ahead would be treacherous. But Lily knew one thing. She was ready to face whatever came next. The truth had a way of exposing itself, no matter how deeply it was buried. And she was going to make sure it was heard. The next few days felt like a blur. The news of Richard Carlisle's involvement in the money laundering scheme had shaken the city. His name, once a pillar of the community, now appeared everywhere. On every news outlet, in every social media post. The investigation into his actions seemed to be gathering momentum, but Lily knew that the real battle was still ahead. Victor Grant's empire had just begun to crumble, but it wasn't going to fall without a fight. She could feel the weight of the people behind him, powerful people who would do anything to protect themselves. And now that she had exposed one of their key players, Lily had become a target. Lily met with Sarah at a quiet cafe later that week to discuss the next steps. Their plan was simple: gather enough evidence to expose Grant's full operation, and fast. But as Sarah handed her a new batch of documents, Lily's phone buzzed, cutting through the tension. It was a message from an anonymous number. "You're getting too close. Stop while you can, or face the consequences." Lily stared at the message, her heart racing. The threats had started. This was the moment she had been dreading, but also the moment she had been preparing for. The deeper she dug into Grant's world, the more dangerous it became. But she couldn't back down now, not after everything she had learned, not after everything her brother had gone through. "What is it?" Sarah asked, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Lily's expression. Lily showed her the message. "They know we're getting closer. This is just the beginning." Sarah's face tightened with concern, but there was no hesitation in her voice. "We can't stop. Not now." Lily nodded, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed a response, sending it into the void. "You won't intimidate me. I'm not stopping." Before she could think much about the message, Sarah spoke again. "There's something else, Lily. I've been digging around, trying to learn more about how deep this goes, and I found something disturbing." Lily raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Sarah slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a document, an email trail between several of Grant's associates. But what caught Lily's eye was a name she recognized immediately: William Tate. The man had once been a key witness in her brother's trial, a man who had given testimony that had ultimately contributed to Jacob's conviction. And now his name was showing up in emails discussing the suppression of evidence. "What is he doing in these emails?" Lily asked, her voice tight. Sarah shook her head. "I'm not sure, but it looks like Tate was involved in suppressing evidence about the manipulation of Grant's finances. It's possible that he was part of the operation, helping cover things up. The same thing that happened to your brother." Lily's blood ran cold. William Tate, the man who had testified against her brother, was involved with Grant's operation. It made sense, though. He had been part of the system that had wronged Jacob, and it seemed like he had kept his ties to the corrupt side of the law. "I need to speak to him," Lily said quietly, a new resolve hardening inside her. If Tate was connected to Grant's network, then he could be the key to unraveling everything. He might hold the answers she needed to take Grant down once and for all. But finding Tate wouldn't be easy. He had disappeared from the public eye after his involvement in Jacob's trial, and the people involved in Grant's web were not the type to leave loose ends. They'd likely do anything to protect him, just as they had done with Carlyle. That evening, Lily sat in her apartment, running through the possibilities in her mind. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. She had already made waves in the system. Exposing Carlyle had been a huge victory, but there was still so much to uncover. If Tate knew anything, he had to be found. And just as she was considering her next steps, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a threat. It was a call from an unfamiliar number. Lily hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was shaky, but clear. "Miss Collins," the man said, "my name is William Tate. I need to speak with you. It's about Victor Grant." Lily's heart skipped a beat. "What do you know about him?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline. "I know everything," Tate said, his voice low. "I've been involved with him for years, but I can't do this anymore. I can't keep living with the lies." Lily's breath caught. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. "Where are you?" she asked urgently. "I can't say," Tate replied, "but I'll meet you. I need you to trust me, Miss Collins. If you want to take Grant down, You need the full story. Meet me at midnight. Don't bring anyone else. Lily hesitated for a moment, but then she nodded. I'll be there. As midnight approached, Lily's heart raced with anticipation. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Grant's network was vast, and Tate's sudden willingness to talk could be the break she needed. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this was also a dangerous game. Tate was an insider. He had been involved in the corruption that had led to her brother's wrongful conviction. And now, he was offering her the truth. Lily met him in a secluded park late that night, her mind racing as she scanned the area. She didn't know if she could trust him, but if he was truly ready to expose Grant, then this was her chance. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was Tate. "Miss Collins," he said, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and determination. "I've got the evidence, but there's more you need to know. This goes much deeper than you realize." Lily stood face to face with William Tate in the moonlit park, the air thick with tension. She couldn't quite read his expression. There was something in his eyes, a mix of regret and fear, but also a flicker of determination. He wasn't just a former witness in her brother's case. He had been a part of the very system that had wronged Jacob. But now, he was offering her the chance to expose the corruption that had run rampant in the city for years. "You said you have evidence," Lily said, her voice steady, trying to push past her own doubts. "What exactly do you have?" Tate took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled a small envelope from inside his jacket. "This," he said, handing it to her. "This is everything you need to bring Grant down. It's the key to everything." Lily's heart raced as she opened the envelope, pulling out several printed documents. The first few pages were bank transactions, details about offshore accounts, and names she recognized from her earlier research into Grant's operation. But it was the last document that made her blood run cold. It was a signed letter from Grant himself, implicating key politicians and businessmen in the money laundering scheme. There was no doubt about it. Grant had been running a criminal operation for years, and now Lily had the proof. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice tight with disbelief. Tate looked away, guilt washing over his face. "I worked for him for too long, and I knew too much. But when I saw what was happening to you, to your brother, I couldn't stay silent anymore. I know I was part of it, but I'm done. This is the only way I can make things right." Lily held up the document, her fingers trembling as she stared at it. "This could take down Grant's entire operation." Tate nodded. "Yes, but it could also make you a target. He has eyes everywhere, and he won't go down without a fight." Lily's mind raced. The evidence in her hands was undeniable, but it also put her directly in the crosshairs. Grant wouldn't let this go quietly, and with powerful figures backing him, the risks were higher than ever. "You're right," Lily said quietly, her gaze fixed on the documents. "We can't let this information fall into the wrong hands, but we also can't let Grant get away with it. We need to act fast." Tate swallowed hard, his voice low. "But you need to be careful, Miss Collins. Grant doesn't just have power in the business world. He's connected to people in law enforcement, in government. The deeper you go, the more dangerous it becomes." Lily nodded. She had known the risks all along, but now they had a chance to expose the truth. And she wasn't about to back down, not now. "I understand," she said, her voice firm. "But we're doing this. I'm going to make sure Grant pays for what he's done, and I won't stop until the truth is out." Tate looked at her for a moment, his face clouded with worry. "Just be careful. If Grant finds out what you have, there's no telling what he might do." Before Lily could respond, the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. A sound, faint at first, but growing louder, footsteps crunching on the gravel path, quick and purposeful. She turned around, her heart racing. Someone was coming. Tate's eyes widened in fear. "We need to go. Now!" He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the nearby street, but it was too late. From the shadows, two men stepped into view, their figures dark and menacing. Lily's breath caught in her throat. These weren't ordinary men. These were the kind of people who worked for someone like Victor Grant. "Stay where you are," one of the men ordered, his voice cold and low. "We know who you are, Miss Collins." Lily's heart hammered in her chest. She had underestimated how quickly they would move. Her only choice was to keep calm and get out of this. "What do you want?" Lily asked, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her spine. The man smirked. "We just want to make sure you don't cause any more trouble for Mr. Grant." Lily didn't have time to think. She knew the situation was escalating, and she needed to get out of there, fast. She tried to take a step back, but one of the men lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "Let go of me!" she shouted, struggling to break free. But just as quickly, Tate shoved one of the men aside, his eyes fierce. "Leave her alone!" In that moment, Lily saw a flash of something, perhaps fear or realization, in the men's eyes. But they were still closing in, blocking her escape. Out of nowhere, a car screeched to a halt, its headlights blinding. The door swung open, and a figure stepped out. Sarah, her face set with determination. She ran toward them, pulling Lily back toward the car. "Get in!" Sarah yelled. "Hurry!" With no time to waste, Lily jumped into the car, followed by Tate. Sarah slammed the door shut and floored the gas pedal, speeding off before the men could react. As the car sped away, Lily's heart pounded in her chest. They had made it out, but the danger was far from over. Victor Grant was making his move, and now that they had the evidence, there was no turning back. Tate's voice broke through the tension. "They know about you now, Miss Collins. You can't keep going at this pace. You need to go underground. Stay out of sight for a while. They'll come after you harder now that they know you have what they don't want exposed." Lily looked at Tate, her expression hardening with resolve. "I'm not stopping. We're taking this to the authorities, and we're going to make sure Grant is brought to justice. I don't care how dangerous it gets." As Sarah drove through the darkened streets, Lily knew the path ahead would only get harder. But one thing was certain. She wasn't backing down. She had come too far to let fear take control. Grant's empire was about to fall, and Lily would make sure of it. The next few days passed in a blur of urgency and fear. Lily and Sarah kept a low profile, moving between safe houses and making sure they weren't followed. The documents in Lily's hands were explosive, but she knew that releasing them too quickly could put them all in danger. Grant and his network were more powerful than she'd ever imagined, and if they caught wind of what Lily was planning, they would stop at nothing to protect themselves. Tate had disappeared after the incident in the park, and while Lily hoped he was safe, she knew that he was a liability now. If Grant's men found him, it wouldn't end well. The risk was high for everyone involved. But as Lily and Sarah sat in their temporary safe house, plotting their next move, the gravity of the situation hit Lily harder than ever. "We need to move quickly," Lily said, staring at the papers strewn out before her. The evidence was irrefutable, but they needed a way to get it into the right hands, someone who could protect it, and, more importantly, make sure the public heard about it. "I think it's time we go public with this." Sarah looked at her skeptically. "Are you sure that's the best idea? You've seen how far Grant's influence stretches. If we expose this too soon, we could put everyone we know in danger." "I know," Lily replied, her tone sharp. But if we keep waiting, the people behind this, people like Carlyle and Grant, will just get away with it. I'm not going to let that happen. We have to act." They sat in silence for a moment, the tension heavy in the air. The weight of the decision hung over them, but deep down, Lily knew she was right. The longer they waited, the more likely it was that the evidence would be buried, the truth lost. Just as Sarah was about to respond, Lily's phone buzzed. It was an encrypted message, an anonymous number she didn't recognize. "You're running out of time. If you want the truth exposed, you need to act fast. I can help you, but you need to trust me." Lily's heart skipped a beat. Who was this? And how did they know what she was planning? A mix of paranoia and curiosity washed over her. "Who is this?" Lily texted back, trying to mask her nervousness. The response came quickly. "Someone who knows more than they should. You're not the only one trying to bring down Grant. Meet me tonight at the old library. Midnight." Lily stared at the message, her pulse quickening. She turned to Sarah, showing her the text. "What do you think? Should we go?" Sarah's eyes narrowed as she examined the message. "I don't know. It could be a trap." "I don't think so," Lily replied, her voice firm. "They're offering help. Whoever this is, they know something we don't. It's our best shot at getting this out there." Sarah hesitated. "Okay, but we go in prepared. We need to make sure we're not walking into something worse than we expect." That night, they made their way to the old library in the heart of the city. It was a dilapidated building, once a grand place of knowledge, now forgotten and overtaken by time. As they approached the entrance, Lily felt a shiver run down her spine. Everything about this felt off. Too many people were watching, too many eyes in the shadows. When they entered, the dim lighting barely illuminated the rows of empty bookshelves. The air smelled of dust and old paper. Lily's instincts screamed that something wasn't right, but she couldn't turn back now. They moved deeper into the building, cautiously, until they reached a back room. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man whose face Lily couldn't immediately place. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, his face partially obscured by a hood. As he stepped into the light, Lily's stomach dropped. It was none other than Michael Carter, the representative from the Bar Association who had been so adamant about removing her from the case. "You," Lily said, her voice tense. "You're the one who sent that message." Michael nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yes, Miss Collins. I've been keeping an eye on things. I've seen the direction you're taking, and I believe we can help each other." Lily took a step back. "Help? You're the one who tried to shut me down in court. Why would I trust you now?" "I was doing my job," Michael said calmly. "But I've realized something. You're right. Grant needs to be exposed. And you're the one with the evidence. You're the one who can bring this whole thing down." Lily felt a cold wave of disbelief wash over her. Was this some kind of trick? Had Michael Carter been working for Grant all along? Or was he truly trying to make amends? "How do I know you're not working for Grant?" Lily demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of suspicion and anger. Michael raised his hands in surrender. "I'm not working for him. I haven't been for a long time. But I am connected to people who can help you get the truth out there. You're not the only one fighting this fight, and I want to help you finish it." Lily hesitated, weighing her options. She couldn't afford to make a wrong move, but she knew that she couldn't take down Grant alone. Michael Carter might be the key to getting the evidence in front of the right people, the ones who could ensure that Grant's empire fell. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "What do you propose?" Michael leaned in, his voice low. "I'll get you in touch with the right people. Journalists, government officials. people who can protect you and your evidence, but you have to trust me. You have to be willing to move quickly. This isn't just about the case anymore. This is about exposing an entire system of corruption. Lily didn't respond immediately, her mind racing. She didn't fully trust him, but she didn't have a choice. They needed allies, and Michael seemed to be offering just that. "Fine," she said, her voice cold but resolute. "But if you're lying to me, I'll make sure you regret it." Michael gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I'm not lying. But you have to understand, this will get ugly. People will come after you. But if we do this right, we can take down Grant and everyone connected to him." Lily nodded, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. "Let's do it. It's time to bring this all to light." The plan was set in motion quickly. Michael Carter had used his connections to get the evidence into the hands of the right people: trusted journalists, government officials, even members of law enforcement who had grown disillusioned with Grant's reign of corruption. But even with all the help, Lily knew they were taking enormous risks. Exposing Grant would shake the foundation of the city's political and business elite, and they would stop at nothing to protect their interests. The night before everything was to go public, Lily sat alone in the small, dimly lit apartment she had been staying in. Sarah had gone to meet with the journalists, ensuring everything was in place. Michael had promised to provide protection, but the weight of the moment was still heavy on Lily's shoulders. The evidence was irrefutable, but it was still dangerous. Grant and his allies were powerful, and they would do everything they could to bury the truth. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the sound of her phone vibrating broke the silence. It was an encrypted message from Sarah. "It's happening tomorrow. The story is going live. Be ready." Lily took a deep breath, feeling both the weight of the situation and a sense of finality. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, Grant's empire would begin to crumble. But then, as the minutes passed, the message from Sarah was followed by another, unexpected text. This time, it was from Michael. "You're being followed. Get out now. They know everything." Lily's heart stopped. She had known the risks, but seeing the words on her phone made the danger all too real. Her instincts kicked in. She grabbed the evidence from the table and rushed toward the back door of the apartment. There was no time to think. She had to move fast. As she stepped into the alley behind the building, she heard the faint sound of footsteps behind her. Too close. She quickened her pace, her mind racing for a plan. She couldn't let them catch her. Not now. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call. It was Sarah. "Lily, you need to get to the safe house, now." Sarah's voice was urgent, almost panicked. "Grant's men are everywhere. You're not safe where you are." Lily swallowed her fear and nodded, even though Sarah couldn't see her. "I'm on my way. Stay safe." She ended the call and slipped into the shadows, moving as quietly as possible through the city streets. It felt like a lifetime had passed since she'd first started this fight, and now it was all coming to a head. As she neared the safe house, a car pulled up beside her. She froze, her heart racing. But then the window rolled down, and to her surprise, it was Michael. "Get in. Now," he said, his tone urgent. Lily didn't hesitate. She jumped into the car, and Michael sped off, the tires screeching as they left the danger behind. The tension in the car was palpable as they sped through the streets, but it wasn't over yet. Michael's eyes flicked to her as he drove, his voice calm but serious. "They know everything, Lily. You've made a lot of noise, and now they're coming for you." Lily's eyes narrowed. "We're still going through with it. The truth is coming out tomorrow." Michael nodded. "It's too late to turn back now, but we'll have to make sure they don't stop us before it's all out in the open." The story is set to go live first thing in the morning, but you need to disappear for a while. It's going to get dangerous." Lily stared out the window, her mind racing with thoughts of the next steps. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, was finally within reach. She wasn't going to let them take it away now. No matter what came next, she was going to see it through. By the time dawn broke the next morning, Lily was in a safe location, away from prying eyes. Michael and Sarah had done everything they could to ensure she was out of harm's way. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the blinds, Lily's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a news alert. Breaking news. Corruption exposed at the highest levels. Victor Grant and political elite under investigation. The room fell silent as she stared at the screen, her heart racing with a mixture of triumph and disbelief. It was finally happening. The evidence was out, and the story was spreading like wildfire. People across the city, across the country, were waking up to the truth. Victor Grant's empire was crumbling, but even with the victory, Lily knew it wasn't over. Grant would fight back. His network was too vast, too powerful to fall easily. She had exposed the surface of something much larger than she had ever imagined. Suddenly, the phone rang again. This time, it was a number she didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end was familiar. "Lily," Sarah said, her voice breathless. "We did it. The story's everywhere. But there's more. Grant is being taken down, but his network? They're circling. We have to be careful." Lily took a deep breath, her hands steady now as she replied. "We will be. But they're not going to stop us. We've already won the first round." She glanced at the news on her phone again, the weight of the moment sinking in. Her brother's wrongful conviction, the years of injustice, they were all coming to light. Jacob's memory, the fight she'd carried for him, was finally paying off. But Lily knew that the battle wasn't over. It would never be. The system of corruption had been exposed, but its roots were deep. Still, she had no intention of stopping. "This isn't just about Grant," Lily said, her voice filled with resolve. "It's about justice, and I'm going to make sure we get it, no matter what."